You think I didn't know? I said, voice steady low. Rain tapped against the window, the only sound in the room aside from the dull hum of the refrigerator. Heidi sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a half-full glass of wine. She wasn't meeting my eyes. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch. 30 years in homicide taught me that silence made people uncomfortable. The guilty ones cracked under it. Her fingers tightened around the glass. The storm outside lit up the sky for half a second, throwing sharp shadows across her face. When, she asked finally, barely above a whisper. Couple months, I said. Long enough to watch you dig your own hole. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, set it face up on the table. I tapped the screen. A photo came up, Heidi at a rooftop bar, leaning in close to some slick, square-jawed bastard in a tailored suit. Lucas Vance. The junior exec with too much confidence and not enough character. I swiped again. Another photo. Different night, same body language. I kept swiping. Each image was another nail in the coffin. Heidi sat still, eyes flicking between the pictures, but her face gave nothing away. She used to be good at hiding things. Not good enough? You were gone a lot, Kent, she said, voice careful. Always in your head. Always thinking about cases that don't even matter anymore. I nodded slow. And you figured that was reason enough to spread your legs for a guy who wears loafers without socks? She flinched. That was good. Meant she still had some shame left. I picked up my glass of whiskey and took a sip, letting the burn settle in my throat before I spoke again. I was always gone because I was working to keep a roof over your head, keep food on the table, keep things steady. You, on the other hand, were out looking for a goddamn adventure. I let out a humorless chuckle. Tell me, Heidi, did it feel exciting sneaking around like a goddamn teenager? Did it feel good knowing it was all built on lies? Her jaw tightened. You don't understand, she said, pushing the glass aside. I needed something more. Something different. I shook my head. You needed someone to tell you you're still hot. That's all it was. And you found a guy dumb enough to feed you the lines you wanted to hear. She exhaled hard, pushing herself back from the table, arms crossed. You think you're some kind of victim here? You never made me feel wanted, Kent. You treated me like a roommate. I laughed at that. Right? And your solution was to run off with some asshole in a suit. Real solid logic. I picked up the phone again and tapped the screen, bringing up a video this time. A recording of a conversation between Lucas and some other office rats at a bar. A buddy of mine, a guy who owed me a favor, had sent it my way. Lucas bragging, laughing, talking about how easy it was to get what he wanted. Some women, you just tell them what they want to hear, he'd said, smug as hell. Husbands don't pay attention, so you step in and give them what they're missing. Piece of cake. I watched Heidi's face as the words played. Watched the color drain, the set of her jaw go slack. That your idea of adventure? I asked. Being a goddamn punchline to some kid trying to climb the corporate ladder? She shoved the glass away, stood up, arms stiff at her sides. You planned this. You were waiting to rub it in my face. I stayed seated, let my eyes drag over her, taking in the way she was shifting her weight from foot to foot, looking everywhere but at me. No, Heidi. I was waiting to see if you'd grow a conscience. But looks like that's not happening. I drained the last of my whiskey and set the glass down slow. So now I make my move. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. What do you mean? I stood up, took my time, adjusting my coat, letting the weight of the words sink in before I said them. You'll see soon enough. Then I walked out, left her standing there in the kitchen with nothing but the sound of the rain outside and the mess she made of her own life. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting even. It was about making sure people paid for their choices. And Heidi? She was about to learn exactly how that worked. I stepped out into the cold night air, rain still coming down in a steady drizzle. The city smelled like wet asphalt and bad decisions. I pulled my collar up and walked to my car, the old Buick that had seen better days but still ran better than most people I knew. Sitting behind the wheel, I lit a cigarette and let the silence settle. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. That stage passed a while back. What I felt now was something else, cold, measured. I'd spent 3 decades staring down murderers, con men, and liars of all kinds. People like Heidi and Lucas? They weren't special. Just another set of names in a long line of people who thought they were too smart to get caught. The phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glanced at the name on the screen, Mike Jarrett. My old partner. Retired 5 years ago, spent his time fixing up an old fishing cabin in upstate New York, but he still had the instincts. He wouldn't be calling this late unless it mattered. I answered. Yeah. Still awake. I smirked. You tell me. Mike exhaled through the receiver, a sound like an old man getting ready to deliver bad news. Got something for you. Been asking around like you wanted. I flicked the cigarette out the window, watching the ember break apart on the wet pavement. And? Your boy Lucas? He's been playing this game for a while. Not just your wife, either. There's a handful of names floating around, women at his office, a couple from some conference last year. Guy's got a whole routine. I let that sit for a second. It wasn't surprising, but it sure as hell made things easier. You got proof. A dry chuckle. Kent, come on. You think I'd call you empty-handed? I smiled just a little. You're a good man, Mike. Damn right I am. Now, what's the plan? I leaned back, tapping my fingers against the steering wheel. I'm thinking public exposure. Something that leaves a mark. Mike made a thoughtful noise. Well, if it's embarrassment you're after, I got a friend who runs a podcast. Big following, covers scams, cheaters, workplace scandals. That sort of thing. We could feed him a story, let the internet do what it does best. I like that. No screaming, no fights. Just cold, hard exposure. Send him the details. Make sure it lands. You got it. I hung up and stared out at the street, headlights cutting through the rain as cars slid by. Heidi wanted adventure? She was about to get it. 2 days later, the podcast episode dropped. I listened to it from my office, a small space I rented downtown, mostly to get out of the apartment. The host, a guy with a voice built for radio, laid it all out. The affair. The manipulation. The pattern of behavior. He never mentioned names outright, but it didn't take a genius to put the pieces together. I could already hear the clock ticking on Lucas's career. By noon, the office gossip mill had caught fire. By the next morning, Heidi wasn't answering my calls, not that I had anything left to say to her. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted a face-to-face with Lucas. No yelling, no threats. Just a simple reminder that some mistakes cost more than a bruised ego. So I waited. And when the moment came, I was ready. I didn't have to wait long. By Friday, Lucas was on edge. The podcast had done its job. The whispers had started in his office, the knowing looks and meetings, the sudden change in how people spoke to him. Guys like him thrived on perception, on being the sharpest in the room, the most confident, the one who always had control. Now he wasn't sure who was watching, who knew, or when the next blow would land. I caught him at a high-end bar downtown, the kind of place with overpriced cocktails and too much brass. He was at the counter nursing a bourbon, checking his phone every few seconds like a man waiting for bad news. He hadn't noticed me yet. I took my time crossing the room, slid onto the stool next to him, set my glass down with just enough weight to make him turn. The second his eyes landed on me, I saw it, the flicker of recognition, the calculation, the quick attempt to cover his nerves. "Hatcher," he said, forcing a polite nod. "Didn't expect to see you here." I let a slow smile stretch across my face. "I bet." He went still, watching me, waiting to see where this was going. I let the silence do some of the work. Nothing made a man more uncomfortable than knowing he was caught, but not knowing how bad it was going to get. "You seem a little tense, Lucas," I said, finally lifting my drink. "Something on your mind?" He exhaled, trying for casual. "Work's been busy. You know how it is." "Sure," I said. "Long hours. Late nights. Business trips." I took a sip. Takes a real dedicated man to juggle all that and still find time to bang another man's wife. He flinched. A small thing barely there, but I caught it. "Look," he said, setting his glass down. "I don't know what you think you know." I let out a short laugh. "Save it. I don't need you to admit a damn thing. I already know. You think I'd be here otherwise?" He exhaled through his nose, adjusting his cuffs like a man trying to regain control. "All right, fine. You got a problem with me, let's talk about it. But I don't need this. You don't get a say in what you need," I cut in, voice flat. "That ship sailed when you decided to play games with another man's home. You thought you were playing smart, thought you had the upper hand. But here's the thing, Lucas, you don't get to walk away clean." His jaw tightened. "So what? This is some kind of threat?" I shook my head. "No threats. Just a reality check. You're a liability now. Your reputation? Shot. Your name? Circulating in ways you won't like. By the time this finishes unraveling, you'll be lucky if you're still signing paychecks." He stared at me, jaw working, hands tensing and relaxing against his glass. "You really think you're gonna ruin me over this?" "I don't have to do a thing," I said, leaning in slightly. "You did it yourself. All I did was make sure the right people saw it." His breath came short now, frustration creeping in. "You think you're better than me, Hatcher?" I let my smile fade. "I know I am. Because I don't have to lie my way through life like a goddamn snake." He held my stare, then scoffed, shaking his head. "This is all about pride for you, huh? Some outdated macho, eh?" I grabbed his wrist before he could finish, not hard, just firm enough to remind him that men like me weren't the ones to test. His eyes widened just a little, the reality of it sinking in. "This isn't about pride," I said, voice low. It's about consequences. I let go, stood up, tossed a few bills on the counter. Take a good look around, Lucas. This is as comfortable as your life is ever gonna be again. It's all downhill from here. I walked away, knowing damn well he'd feel the weight of that long after I was gone. I didn't look back as I walked out of the bar, but I knew what Lucas was doing. Sitting there, gripping his drink too tight, trying to think of a way to spin things, to regain some control. He'd spent his life charming, manipulating, finding the cracks in people and slipping through them. But this time, there was no crack. No escape. Just the weight of his own choices crashing down on him. The air outside was cold, smelled like wet pavement and car exhaust. I pulled my coat tighter and headed for the Buick, letting the night settle over me. The job wasn't finished yet. The next day, I took a drive. West side of the city, quieter than downtown, a stretch of neighborhoods where families still sat on their porches in the evenings, where people nodded at each other on the sidewalk. Heidi's sister lived here. Samantha. Older by a couple of years, tougher by a mile. I pulled up to her house, killed the engine, and sat there a moment. Through the window, I could see her moving around the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, face set in that way she always had when she was focused on something. I'd never seen her rattled. She was the kind of woman who could dress you down with a look, had that natural authority that made people sit up straight when she walked in a room. She had never liked me much, not because I was a bad husband, but because she thought I was too detached, too caught up in my own world. I knocked twice. A few seconds later, the door swung open. She stood there, drying her hands on a dish towel, eyes sharp, already braced for something. "Kent," she said, voice level. "Didn't think I'd be seeing you anytime soon." "Yeah, well, here I am." She stepped aside, motioned for me to come in. The place smelled like coffee and something warm cooking on the stove. "Coffee?" she asked. "Sure." She poured 2 cups, slid one across the counter to me. No small talk. She wasn't that type. "You hear about Heidi?" I took a sip, nodded. "Figured you'd want to know before you heard it from someone else." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I already know. She called me in tears 2 nights ago, saying her whole life was falling apart." I snorted. "That right?" "She told me you set her up. That you humiliated her. That you're trying to destroy her life." She studied me. I told her she did that herself. I met her eyes. Didn't expect that. She shrugged. Heidi's always been the type to chase whatever makes her feel good in the moment. I spent half our childhood pulling her out of bad decisions. She just got older and the stakes got bigger. I nodded slowly. "Lucas is done, too. Career's circling the drain. Thought you might want to know." A shadow of something flickered across her face. "Satisfaction, maybe?" "Good." Silence settled between us. It wasn't uncomfortable. Just 2 people who understood the situation for what it was. She finally sighed, pushing off the counter. "What now, Kent? You got what you wanted. What's next?" I stared into my coffee, then set the mug down. "I walk away." She gave a short nod, like that was the only right answer. As I turned to leave, she said, "Emma called me." That stopped me. I turned back, something tightening in my chest. "She did?" "Yeah." Said she's been thinking about reaching out." She paused. "Said she wasn't sure you'd want to hear from her." I swallowed hard, forced my face to stay neutral. "That's so. You should call her, Kent." I nodded but didn't say anything. I walked out, got back in the Buick, and sat there for a long time, staring at the worn leather of the steering wheel. Some things were over. Some things still needed fixing. I just had to figure out which was which. I drove without thinking about a destination. Just let the Buick eat up the miles while the city stretched out around me. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy, like it was deciding whether to break open again. Streetlights flickered past, casting long shadows across the dashboard. I turned onto a quieter road, the kind lined with old brick buildings and businesses that had been around longer than I had. A diner sat at the corner, its neon sign buzzing against the night. Seemed as good a place as any. Inside, the place smelled like coffee and fried food, the kind of comfort that never changed. A few late-night regulars sat at the counter, nursing their own stories over plates of eggs and toast. I slid into a booth near the window, ordered black coffee from a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the place opened. No questions, no small talk. Just a nod and a cup set down in front of me. I was halfway through it when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, expecting Mike, maybe another update on how fast Lucas's career was going down the drain. Instead, it was a number I hadn't seen pop up in a long time. "Emma." I stared at it, thumb hovering over the answer button. It rang twice more before I swiped up. Yeah. A pause, then a breath on the other end. Hey, Dad. I leaned back in the booth, watching the headlights from the street cut through the window. Hey, kid. Another pause. Neither of us had ever been great at talking. She got that from me. Samantha said she saw you, she said finally. Yeah. Said you might want to hear from me. I exhaled, let the silence stretch just enough. She was right. I heard her shift. Maybe sitting down, maybe just trying to figure out what to say next. I wasn't sure. It's been a long time. Too long, I admitted. More silence, then. I heard about Heidi. Of course she had. This kind of thing spread fast, even if I hadn't told her myself. Not my proudest moment, I said, staring into my coffee. She did it to herself, Emma said, voice steadier now. You just made sure she didn't get away with it. I smiled a little at that. Guess you've been talking to your aunt. Yeah, well, Sam always calls things the way they are. She hesitated. So do you. That sat between us for a minute. You good? I asked finally. A small exhale. Yeah, I'm figuring it out. Job's all right. Life's life. She hesitated again. I don't know why I called. You don't have to know, I said. You called. That's enough. The pause on the other end wasn't tense this time. Just quiet, like something settling into place. Maybe we could get coffee or something, she said. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Yeah, kid. I'd like that. Another breath. Okay. I'll text you. The call ended. I set the phone down, picked up my coffee, took a sip. The waitress came by, topped it off without a word. I nodded my thanks, watched the street outside. Some things were ending. Some things were starting again. Either way, I wasn't looking back. A week passed. Lucas went quiet. No more smug social media posts, no more office hotshot routine. Word was he took an extended leave of absence, which was corporate talk for, we need you to disappear before this gets worse. His name was mud in the industry. Nobody wanted to be the guy caught vouching for him. That was the thing about people like Lucas. They built their whole lives on image, and once the cracks showed, the whole structure came down fast. Heidi tried reaching out twice. Once in a text, we need to talk. I left it on read. Second time, she called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail, voice thick, teetering between anger and desperation. You can't just do this, Kent. You don't get to ruin my life and walk away like nothing happened. I deleted it before she finished. Saturday morning, I drove to a hardware store on the other side of town, picked up some sandpaper, a new set of chisels, a tin of wood stain. The cashier, a guy in his 60s with hands that looked like they built things, glanced at my stuff, then at me. Got a project? Something like that. He nodded, not pressing, just bagged my things and handed them over. On the way out, my phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Coffee? 2 p.m.? I texted back. Yeah. See you then. I got to the coffee shop early, picked a corner table where I could see the door. It was a small place. Not one of those polished chains, but a neighborhood spot with scuffed wooden floors and a menu written in fading chalk. People came here to sit and talk, not just grab a cup on the way somewhere else. Emma walked in a couple minutes after 2. She looked good, older, more sure of herself. A little bit of her mother in the way she carried herself, but more of me in her eyes. She saw me and hesitated for just a second before coming over. Hey, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Hey, kid. She set her cup down, fingers wrapping around it, like she needed something to hold on to. I remembered that from when she was young, how she'd grip a glass with both hands when she was nervous. She studied me. You look the same. Bad or good? She smirked. Not sure yet. That was fair. We sat in the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable but still carried weight. Then she exhaled, tapped a fingernail against the side of her cup. I was mad at you for a long time. I know. She shifted, glancing out the window. Mom made it sound like you didn't care about anything but the job. Like you didn't try. I set my cup down, met her eyes. And now? She exhaled like she was steadying herself before stepping onto uneven ground. Now, I think she told me the version that let her sleep at night. I didn't say anything. She wasn't wrong. She shook her head, looking down at her coffee. I should have called sooner. You did now. That's what matters. She looked up, met my eyes again. So what now? I smirked. Coffee, I guess. That got a small laugh out of her. The first one in a long time. We sat there for a while, talking about nothing and everything. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't some clean, easy reunion. But it was real. And that was enough. A year passed. The city didn't change much, but I bought a small place on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just a house with a decent garage and enough space for a workbench. The kind of place where a man could keep to himself. Mornings were quieter now, no strained conversations over coffee, no pretending not to notice when someone spent too much time on their phone. Just me, a fresh cup, and the sound of the world waking up outside. Lucas was gone. The last I heard, he tried to jump to another firm in a different city, but the internet had a long memory. His name carried weight now, but not the kind that got you a corner office. Heidi? She stuck around for a while, tried playing the victim with mutual friends, but no one bought it. Whatever adventure she'd been chasing, she caught it, and it led her straight to nowhere. Last I heard, she moved out of state. I never heard from her again. Didn't need to. The divorce wrapped up clean. I kept what mattered, let her have whatever made her feel better. At the end of the day, all I cared about was moving forward. Emma and I weren't what we used to be, but we were something. She called once a week now, sometimes more. Sometimes I'd even call her first. A couple of months back, she showed up at my place with a toolbox and a look that said she wasn't taking no for an answer. You always talk about this project, she said, eyeing the unfinished table sitting in my garage, with sanded smooth but still raw. But you never finish it. I smirked. That's supposed to be a metaphor? She rolled her eyes. No, Dad. It's supposed to be a table. Let's go. We built it together that weekend. She cursed when she bent a nail the wrong way. I gave her shit for it, and for the first time in years, it felt normal. Like something lost had found its way back. The past didn't disappear. It didn't need to. I wasn't trying to erase it. I was just making sure it didn't own me. One evening, Mike dropped by, beer in hand, the way he always did. We sat on the porch, watching the sun dip low, a comfortable silence settling between us. Finally, he sighed, cracking his bottle open. You did all right, Hatcher. I smirked, taking my own beer. You sound surprised. He chuckled, shaking his head. Not surprised. Just didn't think I'd see the day you let go of a case. I took a slow sip, let the cold settle in my chest. Wasn't about the case, Mike. He nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. The night stretched on, the sky darkening, but I didn't feel the weight of it anymore. No more ghosts, no more unfinished business. The case was closed. And for the first time in a long damn while, I was finally free.